Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm JADHAV and these are the headlines. In Syria, at least 14 people have been killed and dozens wounded in an explosion in the northwestern town of Al-Bab. Locals say the blast occurred when a bomb-laden vehicle blew up in a crowded area in the town. Azerbaijan says it has liberated 3 more villages and several strategic heights from Armenia during the fighting over the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Azeri President Ilham Aliyev said Army's successful operations are ongoing in the region. Meanwhile, Armenia's Ministry of Defense claims the fighting has slowed down because of international pressure. In Kyrgyzstan, the Election Commission has annulled the results of Sunday's parliamentary polls after violent protests. 1 protester was killed and over 500 injured in protests against the results, which handed victory to 2 establishment parties. India has failed to meet the second deadline set by a Pakistani court for it to appoint a lawyer for Ross-serving terrorist commander KULBHUSHAN JADHAV. During a hearing, Pakistan's Attorney General said India is not interested in pursuing the case despite Islamabad's repeated calls. JADHAV had confessed to crimes of espionage and terrorism in Pakistan, after which he was sentenced to death by a court in 2017. West African leaders have lifted sanctions on Mali following the August military coup that ousted President Ibrahim Keita. In a statement, the West African states said the decision follows notable progress towards constitutional reforms. U.S. President Donald Trump has returned to the White House to continue his treatment for coronavirus after a 3-night hospital stay. America's COVID-19 death toll has crossed 210,000 with over 7.4 million cases. India has reported 884 deaths and over 61,000 infections in the past 24 hours, bringing the cases tally to 6.8 million. In Pakistan, 6 people died overnight, taking the death toll to 6,523. Globally, the coronavirus infection tally nears 35.4 million with over 1 million deaths. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now with the news in detail. In Syria, at least 14 people have been killed and dozens of wounded in an explosion in the northwestern town of Al-Bab. Locals say the blast occurred when a bomb-laden vehicle blew up in a crowded area in the town. In March last year, Turkey and Russia agreed to a ceasefire in Syria, but the development failed to restore peace in the country. Syria has been mired in a civil war since 2012. The United Nations says the conflict has killed nearly 400,000 people and displaced over 6.6 million. Azerbaijan says it has liberated 3 more villages and several strategic heights from Armenia during the fighting over the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Azeri President Ilham Aliyev said the army's successful operations are ongoing in the region. Meanwhile, Armenia's Ministry of Defense claims the fighting has slowed down because of international pressure. Earlier, Turkey said Armenian forces are committing war crimes by targeting civilians. Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu took the matter up in a meeting with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. The NATO chief called for a ceasefire as the death toll from the clashes continues to rise. And for more on this, we are joined by Dr. Mark Mirowitz, who is a New York-based foreign policy expert. Dr. Mirowitz, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. Do you think that the recent flare-up in the Caucasus between Armenia and Azerbaijan risks a full-scale war?
Well, I certainly hope not. I think that immediate action needs to be taken by the major powers, especially the United States and Russia and possibly France, to put a stop to this. There's certainly the risk. The problem that you have is that certainly the president is distracted by his own COVID-19 issue, and America is distracted by COVID. The rest of the world is distracted. This is not a time for a war. So is there a risk of it? Yes, there's a risk of it, but it needs to be stopped immediately, and a ceasefire, and stop these activities, because otherwise, yes, there is a risk of a further expansion of it, and there's no time or place for such a conflict at this time, especially in the situation in the world as we see it right now.
Okay, Dr. Mirowitz, why is Armenia reluctant to free the occupied territories despite the fact that the region of Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan?
Well, I mean, I can't speak or analyze for why Armenia does what it does, but it certainly would appear that, from what my understanding is, certainly Armenia has been bolstered by Russia and Iran. Those are two fairly powerful backers, and it's about time that they stop that. Iran's activities in the region are not positive. The United States has taken note of that. The United States has sanctioned Iran for its activities, so it needs to stop bolstering Armenia on this issue. And secondly, Russia, which is the key factor here, and of course Turkey's involvement. So you risk an actual conflagration, not just of the immediate powers involved, but also the other powers in the region, and that is very, very concerning and very dangerous, especially right now where the major powers in the world are distracted, as I said before, and particularly what's happening with President Trump right now. I don't see where our United States government is in a position right now to intervene and put a stop to this. So things like small wars, what we're seeing in the era of COVID is that smaller, and I'm calling it small even though it's not small for the people involved, but smaller conflicts in the world seem to be erupting, and issues seem to be erupting much more so than in the past, and don't seem to dampen down and to stop because the leaders of the world are focused elsewhere with the rise of the COVID and the fact that it's not ending, and the fact that the president himself has COVID-19. I mean, this affects everything and gives an opportunity and a possible opening for these kinds of disputes. And we see, the rise of the Eastern Mediterranean dispute. We see the rise in Armenia and Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh. These issues have been around for a long time. Why particularly now are they rising up? The answer is the world is in disarray. I'm quoting Richard Haas of the Council on Foreign Relations. But it's a world in disarray, and therefore there are opportunities to do this. So I think that there needs to be a stop to it immediately, and that will require the application of interest and focus by the U.S., by Russia, to put a stop to this what could be, and of course the loss of life and property is heartbreaking, and you're not going to solve the underlying dispute with a conflict like this. I just don't see it, because one conflict will lead to another conflict back and forth, so there's no solution to it. Maybe a broader solution and discussions would be very helpful, but not fighting. That's how I feel about it.
Dr. Mirowitz, when we specifically talk about Turkey, it has repeatedly condemned Armenian aggression in the region. Do you think will it be able to achieve international support against Armenian belligerence?
Well, I mean, certainly Turkey is a key player here, and the relationship between Turkey and Azerbaijan is a close, even brotherly relationship. In terms of Turkey's relationship with Armenia has been very fraught and very difficult. This Azerbaijan issue has been, and Nagorno-Karabakh has been around for many years, and Turkey has, in a very a very essential way, supported Azerbaijan's position. Changing the status quo will be very, very difficult. I think that Turkey, and I should have said, and I would like to add, should be a peacemaker and a negotiator with Russia. I also don't see any advantage to, and I see a big disadvantage for Turkey to be on the other side of Russia on this issue. I see no good coming to Turkey from that. So I think getting the U.S. involved, getting France involved, Russia, Turkey, these different powers to try to mollify or pacify or stabilize this dispute is absolutely essential, because this is a long-standing dispute. It's not going to be solved overnight, and it's certainly not, I don't think, going to be solved by territorial advances one way or the other. And I just don't see a win-win here. I see only lose, lose, lose. The world has got other things to focus on, and this is not one that should be continuing in the region. So I do agree with you that Turkey has a major role, and it's an honest broker, certainly, with respect to Azerbaijan. As far as the long-standing relationship and issue between Turkey and Armenia is well known, and that has been a difficult one. It would be very nice, actually, if Turkey and Armenia, implementing the protocols that were negotiated some years ago, which is really an agreement and not an agreement to agree, would come to terms on better relations. I think that would help an awful lot, by the way, in solving this dispute as well. But the fact that that was never resolved, and now you have this issue, you have one issue compounding another issue, so it's an interlocking series of challenges, and I don't see a way out of it. And certainly the way out is not via conflict and fighting. That is not a solution, especially in a world of the kind we're living in right now, a pandemic. I just think this is to be stopped. And you know, it's not a question of right and wrong. It's a question of not pursuing conflict in a situation where the world is facing such huge challenges. There's no place for it.
Dr. Mark Mirowais, thank you very much for your time at Indus News, a foreign policy expert from New York. I really appreciate your time. Now, moving on, Kyrgyzstan's election commission says it has annulled the results of the Sunday's parliamentary elections after violent protests. One protester was killed and over 500 were injured in protests against the result, which handed victory to two establishment parties.
The opposition group said they have seized power after taking control of government buildings in the capital, Bishkek. The opposition appointed their own acting interior minister, head of national security and prosecutor general. President Sooronbay Jeenbekov has called the development a bid by some political forces to seize power illegally. In a statement, Jeenbekov urged his opponents to stop protest, saying he has ordered security forces not to use force. Earlier, the protesters stormed into security headquarters and freed former President Almazbek Atambayev from custody. They also attacked the parliament and took its control. Police used tear gas and water cannons as protesters attempted to enter the government buildings. Biremdik and Makanim Kyrgyzstan parties looked set to dominate the parliament after polls, but Western observers say the election had been marred by vote buying.
India has failed to meet the second deadline set by a Pakistani court for it to appoint a lawyer for convicted terrorist commander Kulbhushan JADHAV. JADHAV confessed to crimes of espionage and terrorism in Pakistan, after which he was sentenced to death by a court in 2017. During a hearing, Pakistan's Attorney General said India is not interested in pursuing the case despite Islamabad's repeated calls. He said JADHAV was given full chance to file a review petition against his conviction in pursuance of the orders by the International Court of Justice. In 2019, the ICJ rejected India's plea for the annulment of the court decision along with his release and safe passage to India. In India, thousands of people rallied in several cities to demand justice for a Dalit woman who died after being gang-raped last month. Public criticism grew after the family of the victim said her body was cremated by the police without their consent. India is one of the world's most dangerous places for women, with a rape occurring on average every 15 minutes. In December 2012, the gang rape of 23-year-old woman sparked a nationwide outrage and led to a tough new anti-rape law. but there has been no sign of crimes against women abating. U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says Afghans should not let the opportunity for peace slip away. Khalilzad and General Austin S. Miller met with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and the Taliban leadership in Qatar. In a series of tweets, Khalilzad said violence in the country is too high and too many Afghans are dying. He said the U.S. is pressing for a significant reduction in violence that will lead to a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. The Afghan president's spokesman said both the sides stressed on availing the peace opportunity for ending the war. Meanwhile, the Taliban spokesperson, Dr. Mohammad Naeem, said the two sides discussed the implementation of the Doha Pact. Israeli forces have shot dead a Palestinian youth in the occupied West Bank's Tulkarem city. Palestine's media says the young man bled to death while lying on the road after sustaining wounds from gunfire. The media said after the incident, Israeli soldiers set up a checkpoint at the entrance of the town and carried out aggressive raids. A large number of Israel's infantry troops are deployed in the farmlands surrounding the nearby town. Earlier, Israel also carried out airstrikes against a Hamas site in the Gaza Strip. Israel's military spokesperson said the strike was a retaliation to a rocket fired from Gaza. Ankara has accused Ottawa of following a policy of double standards after Canada suspended drones export to Turkey. In a statement, the foreign ministry said there is no explanation of blocking defense equipment exports to a NATO ally, while Canada does not see any harm in exporting arms to countries that have military involvement in Yemen crisis. It said Ottawa should act without being influenced by those opposed to Ankara. Earlier, Canada halted the export of drone technology to Turkey after claims of its use by Azeri forces in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Foreign Minister François-Philippe Champagne said in line with Canada's export control regime, Ottawa has suspended the relevant permits to Turkey. Turkey says it supports NATO's initiative to reduce Eastern Mediterranean tensions despite Greece's negative behavior. The NATO allies Ankara and Athens have been at odds over drilling claims in rich waters. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan received NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in Ankara. Turkey's communications directorate quoted Erdogan as saying Ankara respects the rights and interests of both itself and its NATO allies. The president said Turkey expects the same from its allies. In a tweet, Stoltenberg said the two sides had a good discussion on a range of security issues, including deconfliction mechanism. Meanwhile, the EU has welcomed the return of a Turkish drill ship to port. A European Union spokesperson said the move will help ease tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged the world powers to keep working towards a lasting ceasefire in Libya. In a virtual meeting co-hosted by the United Nations and Germany, Guterres called for backing a UN arms embargo on Libya. He said the violations of the embargo are a scandal and called into question the commitment to peace of all involved. Guterres says peace efforts must be supported not only in words but in actions as well. Well, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas expressed hope the conflict in Libya can now be resolved. He said there has been a recent shift in thinking from military to political logic. The summit comes amid international pressure to Libya's warring sides to hold off attack on the strategic city of Sirte. West African leaders have lifted sanctions on Mali following the August military coup that ousted President Ibrahim Keita. In a statement, the West African states said the decision follows notable progress towards constitutional reforms. They also called on the government to release all remaining detainees arrested since the military coup. On Monday, Mali's transitional leaders announced a new government with some of the top posts going to military officials. Kuwait's new Emir has asked the cabinet to carry on its duties and prepare for parliamentary elections due this year. The development came after the Prime Minister handed in his government's resignation. The state media said Prime Minister Sheikh Sabah Al Khalid Al Sabah called on the new Emir Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmad Al Sabah. It said Sheikh Nawaf expressed full confidence in the current cabinet, which was formed last December. Despite the Emir's praise for the current cabinet, 10 lawmakers submitted a no-confidence motion last month against the deputy premier. Nawaf took the helm of the country following the death of his half-brother Amir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmad last month. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Tokyo says the US and Japan believe the situation in Asia-Pacific region is increasingly severe. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Tokyo for a Quad meeting with his Japanese, Australian and Indian counterparts. Ahead of the meeting, Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said Japan has been pushing hard for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Suga said the international community has started understanding that this is a vision for a regional peace and stability. Creation of free and open Indo-Pacific initiative focused on economic and security cooperation is the main agenda of the Quad meet. Earlier, Pompeo hailed new Japanese Prime Minister Suga as a force for good. The US Secretary of State said he believes Suga will work to strengthen the relationship between Washington and Tokyo. China, on behalf of 26 countries, has rebuked the US and Western countries for human rights violations. At the UN General Assembly, China's envoy Zhang Jun called for immediate and complete lifting of sanctions against the developing countries. Speaking at the general debate of the Third Committee of the UNGA, Zhang said COVID-19 pandemic has caused severe impact on all the countries, especially the developing ones. The envoy said, but unilateral sanctions amidst such crises impede the realization of social and economic development. He says such coercive measures violate the principles of the UN Charter and international law. The Chinese envoy also expressed grave concern on racial discrimination.
Almost 20 years after the adoption of the Durban Declaration and the Program of Action, instances like the death of George Floyd and the shooting of Jacob Blake continue to take place, and vulnerable people continue to suffer or lose their lives to racism and police brutality. Such instances are a reminder that chronic and deep-rooted social discrimination, police brutality, and social inequality still exist.
Jammu and Kashmir People's League is celebrating its 46th Foundation Day today. At a conference in Islamabad, all-party Hurriyat conference leaders slammed India's inhumane and illegal occupation of Kashmir. The Kashmiri freedom leaders called on the civilized world to deliver the UN's promise of Kashmiri's right to self-determination. Azad Jammu and Kashmir's former president Sardar Yaqub Khan said it is time for the international community and the rights bodies to raise their voice for the Kashmiris oppressed by Indian occupied forces.
Since a long time we are waiting for international communities to at least to understand, and they must understand because they should realize that what is going on over there. So I think we are here today to discuss regarding this matter, and UN is supposed to be very much involved in this case because UN resolution is there, and so far international community is not going to be very concerned with the Kashmir issue.
It has been over a year since India revoked Kashmir's UN-recognized status and imposed a curfew and communications blackout in the valley. Now moving on, US President Donald Trump has returned to the White House to continue his treatment for coronavirus after a 3-night hospital stay. Over in India, another 884 people have died and over 61,000 tested positive in the last 24 hours. Globally, the coronavirus infection tally has crossed 35.4 million with over 1 million deaths. More in this report.
The new coronavirus continues to take thousands of lives and infect over hundreds of thousands every day. The outbreak is most aggressive in the US, India and Brazil, which account for half of global deaths and cases. America's New York State is imposing new restrictions in virus hotspots as clusters re-emerge. The country's death toll has crossed 210,000 with over 7.4 million cases. But President Trump, after returning from hospital, urged all Americans not to confine themselves to their homes.
And one thing that's for certain, don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. You're going to beat it. We have the best medical equipment. We have the best medicines, all developed recently. And you're going to beat it. I didn't feel so good. And 2 days ago, I could have left 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I felt great, like better than I have in a long time. I said just recently, better than 20 years ago. Don't let it dominate. Don't let it take over your lives.
Meanwhile, in Europe, an increase in the number of hospitalizations and deaths is prompting governments to impose more restrictions. The UK has recorded over 12,000 new coronavirus cases, almost double the daily rate at which new cases were running last week. Amid rising cases, Ireland's Prime Minister Michael Martin has refused to follow the advice of health chief to impose a lockdown. In Australia, cases have been rising again in Victoria, the country's virus hotspot.
There are 216 active cases of coronavirus in Victoria. That's 15 new cases since my update yesterday. 8 of those 15 are linked to known outbreaks and complex cases. 7 are under investigation by our public health team. 2 cases were reclassified. There have now been 807 deaths due to this global pandemic. I'm sad to report that is an increase of 1 since yesterday.
In Southeast Asia, the virus still paints a grim picture as India cases tally exceeds 6.8 million with over 102,000 deaths. In Iran, nearly all of the country has been put on red alert as the infections and fatalities have hit record levels. In Malaysia, Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin has quarantined himself for 14 days after his cabinet minister tested positive for the virus.
In Pakistan, 6 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 during the last 24 hours, which raises the death toll to 6,523. The health ministry says 467 people tested positive in a day. The ministry said there are 8,588 total active cases in the country. It said out of over 315,000 cases, more than 300,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 138,000 cases have been detected in Sindh province, while over 100,000 reported in Punjab so far. The National Command and Operations Centre says 86 people across the country are on ventilators. There are no COVID-19 patients on ventilators in Balochistan and Azad, Jammu and Kashmir. Washington says important progress has been made in the U.S.-Russia nuclear arms control negotiations held in Finland. This comes as U.S. Presidential Envoy for Arms Control Marshal Billingsley met Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybkov in Helsinki. In a tweet, Billingsley thanked Finland's President Sauli Niinisto for hosting the pivotal dialogue. The Russian Foreign Ministry said the 2 representatives discussed the prospects of cooperation in the sphere of arms control. Moscow and Washington have been trying to agree on terms to extend the arms control New START treaty that expires in February 2021. The New START is the only treaty that regulates arms control between the 2 countries, including nuclear weapons. Russia has welcomed the recently signed Juba peace agreement between Sudan's government and the rebel groups. In a statement, the Russian Foreign Ministry said the peace deal is an important step towards national reconciliation in Sudan. The statement also underscored the role played by Sudan's President Salva Kiir in facilitating the peace talks. The Juba peace agreement addresses issues ranging from military affairs to the return of refugees, but the demonstrators have blocked the country's southern seaport, rejecting the peace deal. The demonstrators say the deal serves foreign agenda and ignores the concerns of the locals. Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny says Russian agencies poisoned him as a threat ahead of next year's parliamentary elections. In an interview, Navalny said he believes the Russian intelligence services had poisoned him with a rare nerve agent. The Kremlin critic said he does not know how a Novichok nerve agent had got into his system. Navalny said he feels better, but complete recovery can take 2 more months. The Kremlin denies any role in Navalny's poisoning. Earlier, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held a telephonic conversation with his French counterpart Jean-Yves Le Drian. Lavrov said any attempts to politicize the alleged poisoning of a Russian opposition figure are unacceptable. A trio of British, an American and a German scientist have won the 2020 Nobel Prize for Physics. The Nobel Committee said it awarded Roger Penrose, Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Ghez for their discoveries about black holes. Secretary General for the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, Göran Hansson, said the recipients' work has helped the revelation of the darkest secrets of the universe. British physicist Penrose has been rewarded for discovering that black holes are a robust prediction of the general theory of relativity. American astronomer Ghez and German astrophysicist Genzel were jointly awarded. They made a novel discovery of a supermassive compact object at the center of our galaxy. Nobel Prize winners are given a Nobel diploma, medal, and prize money of more than $1.1 million. The EU's top court has ruled unrestrained mass surveillance of phone and internet data is unlawful. The court said the retention of the data can only be allowed when the governments face a serious threat to national security. It said even then, the full access to users' data should be allowed to a period that is strictly necessary. The court said such interference with fundamental rights must be accompanied by effective safeguards. It said a court or an independent administrative authority should review such retention of data. The ruling is the result of 4 cases in France, Belgium and Britain. The 3 governments called for the extension of the surveillance tools for the protection of their citizens. 5 people have died after tropical storm Gamma lashed southeastern Mexico. The storm smashed the Yucatan Peninsula's coast with near hurricane force winds. Gamma left behind a trail of destruction, forcing thousands to evacuate. In southern Chiapas state, a landslide buried 4 people after heavy rains. In the Tabasco state, a person drowned while trying to cross an overflowing river. Authorities said Gamma has left more than 600,000 people affected in Mexico's Gulf Coast and flooded several homes. According to the U.S. National Hurricane Center, Gamma is the 24th storm of the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. At least 4 people have died in floods and heavy rain in southern France. A spokeswoman for Alpes Maritimes Prefecture said up to 18 people are missing. Authorities said the missing include 2 firemen whose vehicle was carried away by a swollen river. Southern France has been lashed by torrential rain over the weekend. This has led to swollen rivers sweeping away houses, bridges and parts of roads. Storm Alex has ravaged several villages around the city of Nice on the French Riviera. Earlier, Nice Mayor Christian Estrosi called it the worst flooding disaster in the area for more than a century. Afghanistan cricket team's top order batsman Najeeb Tarakai has died from injuries following a road accident. The Afghanistan Cricket Board said the 29-year-old cricketer was critically injured in an accident on Friday. In a tweet, the Cricket Board said it mourns the heartbreaking and grievous loss of its aggressive opening batsman and a very fine human being. The batsman made his international debut in the 2014 T20 World Cup. Tarakai had featured in 1 T20 international and 12 one-day internationals for Afghanistan, primarily as an opening batsman. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. The International Monetary Fund has approved new aid for 28 of the world's poorest countries amid the coronavirus pandemic. The grants of an estimated total amount of $959 million can be provided for a 2-year period. The funding is intended to help the countries cover their debt repayments to the IMF for the next 6 months. The 28 countries receiving the aid include Afghanistan, Nepal, Tajikistan, and most of the African countries. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has repeatedly called for a debt relief for poorer countries. The European Union says it wants a trade deal with Britain but cannot rule out the prospects of a no deal. Speaking to the Parliament, Commission's Vice President Maroš Šefčovič said the UK's internal market bill proposal breaches the withdrawal agreement. He said the proposed draft is a heavy blow to the British signature and reliability. Šefčovič said the full and timely implementation of the withdrawal agreement is simply non-negotiable. He said if the agreement is reached, both the parties will have to ensure timely ratification of the deal. The Vice President said EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, and his team have the bloc's full support. The Wall Street stocks have climbed for a second day as traders looked for clues on further coronavirus stimulus. The surge of over 1% in Boeing and Goldman Sachs stocks have bolstered the DJI index. The indices of S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite hovered above the flat line. The shares of cruise operators Carnival, Norwegian Cruise Line, and Royal Caribbean rose over 2%. Meanwhile, oil prices gained amid supply disruptions in Norway, a new hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, and the U.S. President's return. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.